Welcome to Media Ethics Lecture 1, Part 1. What is ethics and why should you care? In this lecture, we'll make sure that we're all on the same page, talking the same language. We'll define ethics, look at how some current ethics codes address the concepts of right and wrong in the media, and conclude by discussing why all this is vitally important to anyone entering the media professions. Let's begin the discussion by defining the word ethics. There's a formal definition and an informal definition. The formal definition is the branch of philosophy dealing with questions of right and wrong. Philosophy, of course, is the study of knowledge. Ethics is one branch of that. Other branches include logic and epistemology. Now, the informal definition, doing the right thing. I like to think of it as doing the right thing even when no one is looking. The word ethics is usually treated as a singular when discussing the field. Ethics is fascinating, and as a plural when discussing collections of individual principles. For example, I think Bob's ethics are very flexible. Ethics and morals, are they the same thing? Well, morality usually, but not always, refers to prevailing customs. For example, infidelity would generally be called immoral rather than unethical. However, many people use the words synonymously, and they're not incorrect. It's strictly a matter of personal usage, but you might find that the word morality, usually refers more often to questions of custom. What about ethics, laws, and rules? Are they the same thing? Decidedly not. Laws are usually defined as something passed by legislators or regulators and carrying punishment, strictures. In other words, you can go to jail for violating a law. You can be fined. Now, rules are set by individuals and organizations. They don't carry a government sanction. You don't go to jail for violating a rule. You might get fired, but you don't go to jail. Now, as a point of complication, we have things called ethics laws and ethics rules. Well, those are laws and rules that are related to the field of ethics, but they're not the same thing. Law and ethics, rules, they're different types of entities. Now, they are sometimes put together, by they I mean these collections of rules, into codes of ethics. Codes of ethics we'll talk about in a second. But think of ethics, then, as obedience to the unenforceable. It's not a law, it's obedience to something that you think is right. But why can't we just have a collection of laws? Why do we need ethics? Why can't we write it all down? Because it's impossible to have a law that covers every situation. And some people would argue that we really don't want to live in a society where all of human conduct is regulated and punishable and everything is written down in a book. Ethics is very often a matter of taste and judgment. Something we'll look at is publishing, say, a gruesome or offensive photo. Now, in terms of codes of ethics, what are they? We briefly discussed that codes of ethics are drawn up and they are about ethics. They are put together by organizations, often professional organizations. They are not laws. But to be clear, they can be used as grounds for workplace discipline. You could be fired, you could be suspended for violating a code of ethics, or they could be used against you in a court of law if you were sued for an actual legal violation such as libel, which we'll talk about later on. But what I'm trying to say is that if you're on the stand, an attorney could say, but you violated your code of ethics. Even though it's not a law, it could be used against you in a legal proceeding. Now, in media organizations, codes of ethics often cover such topics as truth-telling, not hurting people, relationships with sources, conflicts of interest, balance, fairness, and context. A very good code to start with is included in your reading, and we'll link to it. It's the NYU Journalism Handbook for Students. It was written by Adam Pennenberg, who, incidentally, he's featured in one of the films that we're going to be watching. The NYU Code covers areas of conduct related both to student practices and journalism. Among the topics of the code, integrity. It includes a very good section I urge you to read about student work, about not using, for example, papers for different classes without permission, dealing with sources, using the work of others, how far you can go, fact-checking, your responsibilities in that area, privacy, respecting the privacy of people you interview, people you deal with, impersonation and undercover reporting, and conflicts of interest. Conflict of interest means you have a vested interest in something, but you report on it anyway. Some other topics in the NYU Code, a pretty good definition of libel. Libel is the law of defamation, the law where someone who is hurt by an incorrect statement can claim damages. Plagiarism, using someone else's material without their permission and using it in a dishonest way. Fabrication, making things up. And use of social media. Social media is probably one of the biggest hot-button ethical issues in media today. There's another code that you could look at. You'll also find this linked to in the documents that you have with this module, the Society of Professional Journalists. Google on the SPJ Ethics Code. You'll find that it covers many of the same topics: accuracy, context, relationships of sources, undercover work, fairness and respect, minimizing harm. Incidentally, you can just Google on either the Society of Professional Journalists Code or Google on the NYU Journalists Code for students. Both will come up first shot. Now, why is this important? Why should we care? Well, number one, you don't want to hurt people. Number two, you don't want to get you or your organization in trouble. Damage to your reputation can be irreparable. Now, you want people to trust you so that you can do your job better. And in a larger point, trust in media is essential to a democratic society. Why is an ethics class important? Well, a code can't cover every situation. We need to study them and see how they extrapolate to real life. There are many nuances that you will have to figure out for yourself. Most importantly, you don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. You don't have to start from ground zero every time. That's why we learn about ethics. Remember this: learning from experience is often very painful. The easy way is to learn from the painful experience of others. Okay, the topic of the next lecture. We're going to look at how the topic of ethics has been debated literally for centuries. We're also going to look at how we can learn from the experience of others, and how the process of making an ethical decision is more or less the same, even if the individual circumstances are different.